All right, we should be live now. So, hey, Eric here and Steve again. This is our second time going Facebook Live in the last few weeks here. And before we get into it, we should probably wish everyone a happy Halloween. All right.
Halloween always reminds me of the day before, November 1st. And for landlords, this could be an important date because November 1st is the day that you can start filing your tax refund garnishments if you have a judgment against the tenant that you're trying to collect on.
All right.
So, as a landlord, it's a difficult thing to try and collect old money that's outstanding, it's due. Maybe the person abandoned the property, maybe they did some damage, maybe they left the lease early and they owe you a couple of months of back due rent. And for any landlords out there that have these kind of judgments, you know how incredibly difficult it can be to collect. Just to give you a quick backstory into some of my background, I come from the credit industry. I've owned a collection agency. I've worked in accounts receivable for years before we started doing background checks, and I'm very familiar with the industry as a whole and what it's like to try to collect on some of these debts. And the numbers are pretty disappointing. So typically dentists have the lowest recovery rate for most industries. Most people don't like to pay their dentist, or at least a lot of things get paid before the dentist.
Well, why pay the guy who causes you pain first?
Right. Well, and typically the dentist doesn't affect your credit. I mean, you're going to pay your car payment, your credit cards that you're getting charged crazy interest on. So it's just a low priority bill. Unfortunately, housing debts rank even lower than dentists.
Really?
Yeah, so it's pretty disappointing as a landlord to know that statistically you're not going to see this money. So any of the advice that I give here, I'm just going to preface it with the fact that your chances of recovery are pretty low. And it's unfortunate, but you got to face that reality and don't be the landlord that pins their hopes and dreams on collecting the $2,000, $3,000 that an old tenant, owes you and count that money as yours, because the chances of you getting it are very, very low. But I'm going to give you a couple of tips and tactics here that might help, and hopefully it does help some landlords recover some of that hard-to-get money.
Well, Steve, I have a quick question. If you're starting with this, because for those of you that don't know, Steve's been working in this industry for 10 years. He's the owner and founder of Rent Prep, and I've been here for about 2 months. So I'm a landlord of 7 years, but my knowledge is very pale in comparison to Steve. So I don't really know much about this subject, so I'm kind of leaning on Steve as we go through this. So how would you actually get started if you did have this situation? You had a tenant who, say, owes you $3,000, and you decided, I want to get this money back. What is the first steps in getting started with this?
So if you evicted them, you're going to want to convert that eviction into a money judgment, which is pretty easy to do. So that original judgment that you're going to file for your eviction is called a forcible entry and detainer judgment. Okay. Once you have that and now they're gone and you can assess damages and start to calculate what the amount that they actually owe you is, it's easy to convert that judgment into a money judgment, so which would put a dollar value on what they owe you. If you didn't go through the eviction process and you're starting cold basically and you don't have a judgment or anything, whenever you're dealing with garnishments, whether it be a wage garnishment or a potential tax refund garnishment, you have to have that judgment in place, which is obviously a court order that says they owe you this money. It's a judge that's actually signing off and agreeing after he's looked at the case and the documentation and saying, yeah, this person owes you the money. So quick landlord tip, document everything. It'll make obtaining judgments a lot easier in the future too.
Okay. As far as the time range, I know we're making this video because today is Halloween and November 1st is the first day that you can start to go through with this. What's your time range on that? Do you know?
So the reason it's November 1st to December 31st is because you want to get your filing in before the following year, so the next year, based on their taxes and their potential tax refund. So that little window that you get there is intended to get your filing in before the end of the year, get everything in order so that when tax refund time does come, everything is already set. So you have a small window. The other thing to point out is a lot of times, I know state of Michigan being one of them, each state kind of prioritizes their garnishments. So Not only is it a priority sometimes, whether it's a government or a student loan or whatever, but other times it can be just a chronological priority. So to get your filing first before another creditor has an opportunity to do that, you want to make sure you're getting it done sooner than the other guy. You're getting your place in line sooner.
Okay.
So the early bird gets the worm when it comes to these types of filings.
So this might be a stupid question, but if somebody was your tenant from like 2 years ago, is that just you're past the point of collecting on something like this? Is there like a time limit on it, or how does it work?
Yeah, so with a judgment, typical statute of limitations is going to be 7 years. Anything beyond that, anything even close to that, is going to be...
So that means you've got a judgment in place, you've
Yeah.
gotten that taken care of, you have 7 years.
Yes.
So what if you haven't done anything yet, and this person left your apartment 2 years ago, but you feel they still owe you money, but you
Yeah.
never got a judgment?
So the more time that goes by, the less likely you are to collect, obviously.
Okay.
But in terms of specific time frame, I would still put that 7-year time frame on it. In most states and most courts, that's looked at as the statute of limitations for debts.
Okay.
So unless you have something else or you've refiled a judgment, which can be done in extending it, but traditionally I would say 7 years is that cutoff. If you don't have anything in place, if you're a landlord that never got the judgment, and you're in the situation that you're describing where 2 years later you just say, this is driving me nuts, I'm getting nowhere, I want to go get a judgment, obviously the sooner the better.
Okay.
The longer you wait, that percentage statistically of you collecting goes down dramatically.
Okay. So I know you kind of covered a lot already with this, but if you had some quick tips, like just on how to get started, next steps going through the process real quick, what would you tell people?
So, in my opinion, the tax refund garnishments, let me explain a little bit how that works and what makes it different than wages.
Okay.
Anybody that's ever garnished wages knows that your state limits the percentage of income that you can garnish. So you can't garnish 100% of somebody's income. I think the most allowable that I've ever seen is 25%, and it ranges by each state. What makes tax refund garnishment so appealing for landlords is because it gives you the opportunity to take a much bigger bite or a bigger chunk out of it, potentially the whole debt amount. So you're not dealing with small percentages, you're dealing with the whole tax refund on the state level. It's important to also point out that this is not federal IRS refunds that you're garnishing. This is just state state refunds typically. So if they have a refund coming to them, and you file that and your state allows you to, it's potentially much easier to do that and take a bigger bite out of what they owe you compared to the very long road of a wage garnishment. And the biggest problem that most landlords run into is you're dealing with a cross section of people that don't typically hold jobs for a long time. Mm-hmm. And that makes garnishing their wages very difficult because each time you got to find their new job. They're not going to volunteer that information to the court, and the court's not going to do the legwork and find it for you. So unless you've got an attorney that has some pretty sophisticated software or ways to keep up on it, it's going to be difficult to do. Okay. So the tax refund garnishment can be easier just because it's a one-shot deal or you're trying to get a good chunk of it in that one shot. And it can be refiled year over year. Okay. So if you don't get it all in that first year, you can file it again next November 1st until you get it all. Okay. So it's a process. You got to stick with it. In any event, I would say it's never a bad idea to seek out an attorney. If you haven't gotten the judgment yet, it's an attorney that's been through this, and certainly one that deals with landlord-tenant laws are going to be able to navigate the courts pretty easily compared to what somebody going in without knowing how to do it.
Okay. One other question I had is, so if you set this up, do you get the refund pretty much, or the money that's owed to you pretty much the same day that they would have gotten their tax refund? Is it just like submitted electronically to your bank account? Do you know that, or?
No, that would be awesome, but it doesn't work like that. So typically, the way that it works is the state will send you kind of a notice that lets you know what their expected refund is going to be.
Okay.
And it depends again by state, but some states will allow you to collect directly from that refund under the premise that this is not a wage, that this is additional income, basically. Other states will require that you attack or try to garnish on the bank account once that's deposited into their bank account, which is much more difficult to do. And especially if you're in a state like New York, like we are, there's new garnishment laws in place that say you have to have at least $2,500 in your account before a garnishment can take place. And if you guys know what it's like dealing with tenants who live month to month and owe a lot of money, the chances of them having $2,500 extra in their account are pretty slim.
Sure.
So, also makes it difficult, again, just speaking to the statistical probability that you're going to collect on this. Usually, in order to get a refund, you've been employed and you've been contributing enough so that you're going to get a refund back.
Yeah.
So if you're dealing with somebody that while they were a tenant, they had a real shaky employment, or maybe they were never employed, or if they're on any kind of government assistance, they're untouchable. Government funds could not be garnished. So if they're collecting Social Security disability, if they're living off of a child support or anything like that, you're not going to touch any of that stuff.
Okay.
We're talking wages and tax refunds based on wages.
It's funny because we have a blog post on our website about this, and I was kind of reading up before we did this Facebook Live video today, and one of the things in there said, if they're a government, and I thought you were talking about if they're a government employee.
Same.
Same thing. So if they're a government employee or they've,
If they work for the post office, their wages cannot be garnished. Yeah. I'm not super familiar with the actual constitutional law, but I know that it is a constitutional law that basically exempts any type of federal income from being touched whatsoever. So that includes benefits and entitlements to actual government employees.
Okay.
So for a landlord out there that's trying to collect on this, my best advice would be take as many stabs as you can. It's definitely a marathon approach. It's not going to be an easy recovery, and it can be super disappointing and disheartening. But what you don't want to do, two things that I see a lot of landlords do is, number one, they become very emotional about it. They start taking it personal. This is a personal attack against you, and why would this person do this to me and not pay?
Yeah.
Even though it may be a personal attack, don't take it that way. Just like we always say at RentPrep here, run your landlord business as a business and remove yourself emotionally. When landlords start to get too emotional, they make mistakes. They say things that can get them in trouble. They do things that can get them in trouble, and this is certainly one of those situations where you got to be careful. You don't want to make threats. You don't want to get to that point where you're so frustrated, you're ready and willing to say anything to get them to pay.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a big no-no. The other advice that I would give, again, is to seek out an attorney. There's no shame in getting extra help on this stuff. Yeah, it may cost you in the long run, but if you find an attorney that's willing to work on contingency, it'll save you from any upfront costs. And it's one of those things that, they get 0% of nothing if they collect nothing. If they do collect, great. You're going to lose a percentage to them, but it's money you wouldn't have had in the first place.
Yeah.
So, never a bad idea. And for a lot of people, just that letter sometimes from the attorney, and they know, okay, Eric's taking this pretty serious.
Yeah.
This is no longer idle threats or a phone call, and he's angry. Now he's taking action, and things are getting done, and now I'm going to have to deal with an attorney here. And so sometimes just doing that will be enough to prompt some actions. Sometimes not, but it's worth at least a shot.
Okay. Do you have any other tips or anything on? I know we covered a lot here, but anything you want to share?
Yeah, anytime you're dealing with garnishments or anything like that, whether it be taxes or wages, you're going to want to get a writ of garnishment from your local court. So typically at the county level, go down there, and that's also a great place to just crowdsource and get some information.
So what exactly is a writ of garnishment? Like, what does that mean?
Writ of garnishment is a form that you would fill out and complete. Looks a lot like any other government form that you can imagine filling out.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah. It's not that difficult, I promise.
All right.
But what's nice also is that the tax wage garnishment filing fees are typically pretty low, $15, $20. They're not expensive. It's a flat fee for that entire year. You're not losing percentages, so your margins could be much better if you do recover. But again, it varies so much by state. As I was just kind of rebriefing myself and researching on this before we jumped live here, I was looking at the different states and got to the point where I was like, we can't cover each state. It's everyone is so different. So check with your local court. They'll be able to give you a lot of direction on either what other landlords are doing or what's available. Some states you may not be able to do the tax garnishment. Other states you will. But it's never a bad idea to kind of get the local flavor and find out what's happening down at your local court.
All right. I mean, this video is pretty long. If people are watching at this point, it's probably something they're interested in. I would say, without doing too much of a plug for Rent Prep here, if you had one tip, because obviously people who are interested in this subject had a pretty big issue with the tenant, what would be your one tip to them to not have a tenant like that going forward in the future?
I think it sounds really obvious, and it's going to be pretty, a blanket tip here, but have really good communication and keep good records and documentation. I've seen a lot of landlords get themselves into situations where they may be in the right completely, and their documentation is terrible, and the judge won't side with you. There's a lot of states that are very, very tenant-friendly states, and are just not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. So you have to have super solid documentation, pictures, if you've got damages, any of that type of stuff is going to help you secure that judgment. And then good communication, constantly keeping up with that. If you are constantly having them every year, year over year, you're having them refill out a lease or even a rental application to gather new information, finding out who their new employers are, or any new next of kin information, or any of that type of information that may update. You want to get the updated. Don't just let them roll over lease after lease and not try to get that stuff updated, because what will happen is you find yourself in a situation where in that original application they filled out, nothing is relevant anymore. They don't work at the same place, they don't bank at the same place, nothing on there is good for you anymore. So it's pretty important to have good communication and keep that information up to date.
All right, cool.
All right.
Yeah, I'm out of questions, so hopefully that was helpful. If you found this helpful, comment below. If you have any questions too, if you comment below, Steve or I will do our best to answer those questions for you. And yeah, thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Happy Halloween too if you're watching us live.